In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse, but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrance and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrance and Sandy.
Welcome to another episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast, where we discuss various topics and offer insights from the perspective of a married couple. I'm Terrance.
And I'm Sandy.
And today we're going to be having a conversation about raising daughters. But before we get into that, please remember to follow the Lunch with Sandy podcast on your favorite podcasting app. And you can also follow us on all social media at Lunch with Sandy. And speaking of Sandy, Sandy, how are you today?
Probably as good as I sound, which is not so hot.
And why is that?
I think allergies came early this year.
You know, funny, you sounded fine this morning.
Yeah, it's kind of started last night.
Allergies might be coming early because your boy Puxatani Phil, or whatever his name is, he did say spring was going to come a little early, and it is a bit nice out there.
Yeah, I started seeing flowers growing, so that's nice.
It's funny, I came home from my run today, and I noticed everyone outside working in their yard. The leaf bags were out. I saw the infamous neighbor next door who never cleans up his leaves was outside cleaning up leaves today.
Yeah, not me. I'm trying to avoid being outside.
Yeah,
because...
and the funny thing today, Matei was outside. And he said, "Hey," he said, "when am I going to see you? I see you. Are you biking or what?" I said, "Matei," I said, "Listen, I ran today. I biked yesterday. I biked the day before." I said, "I'm waiting on you." He said, "Oh, yeah. I said, "I'm surprised to see you out here." He said, "I'm only out here because you're out here." He said, "As soon as you go inside, I'm going back inside."
Yeah. I love this time of the year, but my allergies do not.
Speaking of this time of year, we are in March. And you know what that means? It means that we have a birthday coming up.
Yes, we do.
And Ayla will be turning 14 this year.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of her turning 14 and speaking of her turning 14, you know, there's one area where we do have a lot of experience in.
Raising daughters.
Raising daughters. And I think back, and I got to give a shout out to my man Prince, because Prince told me something that it made me laugh, but it resonated with me. And he said, "Listen," he says, "as a father of daughters, you got one job." And I said,
"Oh goodness,
what's that one job?" And he said, "Keep her off the pole." But that's not.
You're gonna say that.
But that's not what we're talking about today.
But
you know,
valid point.
We discussed this briefly in one of our other episodes about how it's different raising, daughters than it is from raising sons. And regardless of whether or not you're raising daughters or sons, your goal is to raise a child that's going to be able to contribute to society and be respectful in those things.
Yep.
But when I look at raising daughters, there's always something that I add extra to that when I think about how I want to raise, my daughters. Mm-hmm. And for me, I want to raise them with a particular mindset that's going to match whatever skills they may acquire.
Mm-hmm.
And let me explain. There are three things that I think that we need to make sure we nurture when we talk about raising daughters, right?
Yep.
And the first one is we want to make sure that we nurture a healthy sense of self-esteem when we're talking about raising daughters. And when I say healthy sense of self-esteem, what I mean is we want to make sure that in their eyes, how they value themselves and how they perceive themselves is in a high sense, for lack of a better term, right? And I use the term healthy sense of self-esteem because, again, there are some individuals, or you can put yourself in a situation, or you can put you can nurture your child to a situation where they're beyond the measure of reality. And that's not what I'm talking about. But one of the qualities that I think that we should be focusing on when we talk about raising daughters and having a particular mindset is a healthy sense of self-esteem, because I think that's very important. The other area that I think that we really need to nurture has to do with particular characteristics that make them good in a leadership position. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about the traits such as, integrity, compassion, respect, in those areas. Respect and also confidence. And speaking of confidence, that is one other quality that I think that we should nurture when we start talking about, raising daughters. We want to make sure that they are self-assured in themselves and their actual abilities. And I say all that because particularly in today's environment, it's a challenge when you talk about comparing what has been the environment for young women in the past and today. It's not just a challenge from the perspective of the environment. It's a challenge for you now as parents to actually get them to have a particular mindset and to instill certain things in them. And particularly for young women, there are some things that, you have to navigate to put them in a position to actually hear what it is that you actually have to say to them.
Yeah.
And one of those areas has to do with the fact that, as a young woman, there are some changes that happen within them. And those changes not only affect them physically, but it also affects them mentally. And this is something that you may be to attest to, because I'm imagining at some point you were a young woman. But
I don't know, was I can't recollect.
But it's
no, yeah.
When we start talking about puberty in children, both guys and girls go through it. But I think for young girls, there is more of a swing, I'll call it, right?
Okay.
And I think that swing happens earlier. When I say swing, what I mean is from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective, they start changing probably, I think it's statistically, I think they change faster than actual, the boys do.
I would say girls go through more physical changes than boys do, for sure.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
And that does affect kind of everything else too.
Yeah.
To be honest, there are some days that I prefer not to talk to Ayla right now. Don't you sass my daughter. Don't sass my daughter. But, you can tell, sometimes she's just, for lack of a better term, just miserable.
Well, I'm going to rephrase that. I think that I hear what you're saying, and I think that we just have to be cognizant of the fact that when they start experiencing these changes, those changes, like I said, they're not just physical, they're mental. So their behavior will change. Yeah. It'll affect their decision making. And I think that as long as we keep those things in mind, when we talk about raising kids or raising daughters with a particular mindset, in order for us to achieve that, we need to be cognizant of those things and navigate those things, because they are challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
And when those situations happen, the one thing that we have to make sure we do now is we need to make sure that we're not creating a cavity or a divide between us and them, because the change is very impactful. And I know it affects each person differently, but when the behavior starts to change, when the I'm trying to phrase this the right way, when the talking back and all those things start to happen, I think one of the things that we have to make sure that we do is we not just understanding, but at the same time communicating with them. Because I think, one of the easy traps to fall into is I'm not going to communicate with them right now because if I do, I might hit them with a 2-piece and a biscuit.
Well, I must admit that I still am cognizant of how much I want to communicate during certain times.
Yeah.
Because if she's the one that's initiating conversation, that's definitely one thing I learned is that if she's talking, I try to stop whatever I'm doing and have that conversation, because later on, you try to have a conversation with her and she's just like, basically, no.
Yeah. And that active listening is important.
Yeah.
Because you said it, when she starts talking,
right,
that's the time for you to actually
exactly
listen. I think communication is very, very important. I think that, at the same time, we also have to be able to empathize and put ourselves in the shoes of the young teenage girl when these things are happening, because, we have a lot of experience in this.
Yeah.
We have 2 older daughters who we had to go through this with. And I'm sure you remember this. The experience with them were very, very different.
All 3 of them have been very different.
We have raised 3 very unique daughters.
For sure.
And the thing about it is, they tend to amaze me every day. Mm-hmm. And when I say amaze me, I'm not always talking about, wow, what you did was amazing. Sometimes it's like, man, I'm amazed that you made it. Or I'm amazed that came out your mouth, so. Mm-hmm. But the other part about that is, the active listening is important.
Well, yeah. And it's not always a convenient time either.
Well,
that's key. That's, because when they are talking, is just you have to jump on it, because you just never know how fleeting it's going to be. It's like here 1 minute, gone the next. Like it's, like you have this one in a lifetime opportunity. You need to seize the moment.
Yeah. And at the same time, or in conjunction with that, at some point, or particularly at these points when they start to that change starts to happen, they want to be independent, right? Mm-hmm. They want to be able to do all these different things. And the challenge as a parent that you're going to face is you have to be able to balance that, that independence with the authority that you have as a parent. You want them to be able to do certain things, but at the same time, you have to be able to say, hey, whoa.
Yeah.
Bring it back.
It is definitely a balance. Trying to give them the independence to do things and learn things on their own, but not to the point where it's going to harm them.
Yeah, and that in some cases can cause conflict. And so when that happens, now you have to make sure from a resolution perspective, you have a plan in place, or you have steps that you can, take to move that conflict to a resolution. And at the same time, you have to be able to set boundaries so they understand that, okay, well, I can operate between A and B.
Yeah.
But once I go outside of that, there's consequences and repercussions.
Well, and expectations. I think that's one of the best things that worked for Lexi was, when she was driving and going out, it was, okay, what time, and having these conversations, I should say, up front to set those expectations. She knew whatever time she told us was the time to be home.
Yeah. And what's important about that, what you said, so when we're going to talk about Lexi for a second, because at that particular time, I feel that we were being very flexible in understanding to the perspective, or to the fact that, she was growing up, she wanted to do these things. Yeah. And we looked at it from this view saying, okay, well, we're going to allow you to do these, but you need to give us this information. But more importantly, when she didn't do what she said she was going to do, we enforce consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that setting the expectation is important. I think that being flexible with them and being flexible with them and giving them a certain amount of leeway to grow and to experience things is important. But more important than that,
we didn't give her the curfew.
No,
we asked her what time
exactly.
she was going to be home, and that was the time that she had to stick to.
Yeah, but more importantly than all of that is when they break their word.
Oh yeah,
holding them and making them understand that there's actual consequences. Now, all this stuff kind of ties back to those characteristics from the perspective. Not all of them right now, but we'll get to it. But when we provide them the opportunity to lead themselves, right? We're giving them chances to develop particular traits. We're giving them the chance to be respectful from the perspective of, you say this is what you're going to do it. You earn trust and all those other things. You don't do it, life has consequences. And so now, as you move through life, you have to understand that you are going to be held accountable for all these different things.
Yep.
And I think by providing them with that flexibility, that builds a sense of assuredness or a sense of confidence because now, hey, I can do these things, or I have the ability to do this, and I have their support as long as I stay within, again, A and B.
Yeah, and kind of like you said, each child is unique, and I would say that you kind of have to know that uniqueness too to kind of decide what tactic you're going to take with each one.
Yeah.
Because for Shayna, more of her expectation was to be out of her room and off electronics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for Lexi, she was a little bit more, we'll say devious.
Well, I'm going to say it. I'll replace devious with adventurous.
Adventurous, yeah. It wasn't as forthcoming.
Yes.
So our tactics with her had to be a little different. I'm sure she did plenty of stuff behind our back, absolutely. But at the same time, she at least knew, like you said, that there are expectations, there are consequences.
Yeah.
And, that's how life goes.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny because, what you don't know won't hurt. Not us. It may hurt you.
Yeah.
But not us. And I think that the uniqueness between the two of them, even with Ayla, it astounds me because, again, with Lexi, we had to play those cards. We had to say you have between A and B. With Shayna, we never really ran into that.
No. And that's what I mean. Like, it's still the same concept.
Yeah.
It's just applied differently depending on your child. And like Ayla right now, the expectation I feel like is more honestly getting her to do more stuff out of the house. Like, you know what I mean? Like I told her and she almost tried to back out again. She's like, I don't think I want to do track anymore. I said, well, you're doing it.
Well, this is new to me.
Yeah, she just said it today. So for her, it's a little different too. Like we set that expectation, like, listen, you need to do something. Because, well, she's complaining about being bored today, but then she's also saying that she doesn't want to do all these things, So for her, the expectation, I think, is like a little different even there. We don't have to worry so much about her being in her room. She's not adventurous. Well, right now she's only 13. She's not yet as adventurous as Lexi. So I think she's kind of in between.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is they grew up in different times.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing. And, right now, I don't know. I think it's on the rare side that you have kids who are at that age and who are doing more outside because of just the access and technology. And I'm not saying that we want her to be that way because, again, she needs to get out and she needs to start experiencing some of those things. I think a big part of it too is with her, she doesn't want to fail.
Yeah.
And to some, particularly at that age, if you don't try, you won't fail. But,
Yeah.
my view on that is you fail at everything you don't try.
Well, that, and I feel like she's very hesitant to try new things.
Yeah, I think she's very hesitant to try new things in front of people.
Yeah.
And I don't think it makes a difference who the person is.
Right.
Whether it's you, me, or whatever. Sometimes I can have a conversation with her and, we can get through it. But I think that with her, it's a different time. And I think that because of the rarity of kids her age doing different things, I think that makes it a challenge. And because who she is, I'm going to tell you, Ayla is, and people don't believe this, Ayla is a little version of me because I wasn't always the person that I am today.
Right.
And so that's why a lot of times, I can have a conversation with her afterwards and say, hey, listen, you got to do better. You got to try. I understand. You got to try harder. But,
yeah,
when we talk about all of this stuff and we talk about, the change they go through and we talk about giving them leeway and we talk about holding them accountable and enforcing consequences, we always want to make sure that at the end of the day, we're supporting their mental health and self-esteem.
Yeah.
And
that's a big one.
It is a big one because
and honestly, I should say too, one of the things that I noticed raising Lexi and Shayna, and I did my best, and I think I'm doing much better with Ayla, which is, they kind of mimic what they see, and hence, if you as the mother are constantly putting yourself down and remarking on your own looks, in your own body image, I feel like they end up doing something very similar.
Yes, because they model that behavior. And those are some of the biggest challenges that girls face when you talking about, the self-esteem image, the body image, even mental health. One of the things that I've always strived, and I think I've done a very, very good job, and part of it has to do with, and we'll get to this piece later when I talk about having a particular mindset. I make sure that what they see in my interaction with you is nothing but positive. And I know it can't be 100% of the time, but damn it, it's 99.9% of the time. And the reason for that is whenever they decide that they're going to choose a mate, a partner, or whatever,
yeah,
I want them to know what it is supposed to look like.
Right. And not that we haven't, I guess, debated.
No, listen, we've had arguments, but we've never presented ourselves in a negative light to them at any point in their lives.
Yeah. We've never put each other down. We've never, I'm trying to just think of like some of the stuff, like we never got overly heated. Listen, and it's not that we don't do each other dirty in front of them. It's just not something that we exactly.
We don't do that. And
we don't.
When you were mentioning, how you present yourself about certain things, I think that's very important because again, from the perspective of me being a man, there are going to be certain things that they're not going to pick up from me. But there's going to be certain things that they're going to be certain traits that they look for in whoever is going to be with them in their relationship that I'm sure they're going to model or look for. But that aspect of making sure that, when we start talking about that mindset, and I'm going to call it the Queen's mindset because, that's my whole thing, the self-esteem, the being comfortable with who you are, where you are, all of those things.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that, we, and by we, in this sense, I mean you have to portray yourself in that positive light because that's something that they are going to see and that's who they have to model their behavior after when they're in the house.
Yeah. Well, I've always tried to push that it's a healthy body, right? That is the goal that you should be striving for. It's not, having one asset maybe bigger than the other. It's not, now that the fine lines are coming into my face, like try not to comment on those. Ayla now telling me that I look old with my gray hair.
Listen, and when so
and I'm
Ayla,
like, you know what? But I told her, I'm like, that's okay. I'm okay with that.
Exactly.
Like, I don't care. Like, you know.
And I say this, and this is the first time I think I'm gonna. And actually, no, I've said it before. I have this whole thing with being perfectly imperfect. Listen, you are who you are. Love it and own it.
Yeah.
Now, there may be some things about you that you want to change, but you should be comfortable with who you are.
Yep.
You should be, obviously you want to be healthy, you want to be happy. And when I say healthy, I mean physically and mentally.
Yep.
But you should not be living by anybody else's standards.
Right.
And I think that's so important, particularly in today's age of social media, all the access, all the body modification that all these people are doing out there. I get concerned that me being the father of 3 daughters, I don't want them to get caught up in that. You know what I mean? I want them to understand that, listen, you are beautiful as you are.
Yep.
You should be unapologetically you and don't have a problem with being perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, I remember one time too, I don't know where Lexi and I were, and she said something about basically how perfect somebody looked, maybe like in a magazine or something. And I was like, yeah, well, they're probably airbrushed. Like, like it's probably not real. Like, so you can't set yourself up to try to mimic that. I'm like, you're already beautiful as it is. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what your goal should be.
Yeah. And see, this is why, one of the reasons why I labeled this episode Challenges of Raising a Queen is because, again, when I think of a queen, I think of the mindset. I think of inherently capable, self-reliant, independent, confident, able to navigate any challenge that life throws at you. And I think that's the goal that we should be setting for our young daughters. And the thing that always poses a threat to that is all the access to all the information that's out there. And it becomes a challenge because no matter what information you provide them with, it's coming from the mouths of their parents. Yeah. And at some point, there's a period of time where the voice of their peers is going to ring much louder than yours.
Oh, yeah. For
so
sure.
when you're having that conversation, because now it's finally started to come out where you'll see someone in a magazine and they'll look at that magazine saying, hey, that's not me. I didn't okay that. Someone touched that up. Someone airbrushed that. It was photoshopped.
Yeah.
When they see all of this stuff and they have this image, and fortunately, a lot of that stuff is changing now, but the image or the concept of beauty that's out there, right, that's being portrayed is not reality.
Yeah.
And young women have had the tendency in the past to get caught up in that and to do these different things to actually achieve that.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is we need to empower our daughters. And there are certain things that we can actually do to achieve that goal, right? And the first is making them understand the importance of them making their own choices. And when I talk about them making their own choices, now I'm talking about not listening to those voices out there, but making a choice based on what it is that's best for you.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know that sometimes that's hard and sometimes they seek, right, advice from their friends. And I would say that that's kind of the second thing, is not surrounding yourself with friends who are not really friends. And that was one of the things that we had to deal with. Both of them.
With both of them. And the thing with that is this. In the age of social media, it's hard for the younger generation to grasp that you're going to have a very, very small group of core friends who are going to be with you through thick and thin. Mm-hmm. And it's very small. I can count them on less than one hand. But with the age of social media and access, and you have all these friends, I just did air quotes, they don't seem to initially grasp that concept. As they start to get older, they start to understand. But by that time, sometimes situations have happened that have forced them to come to that realization.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, especially teenage girls can be really catty, and it's important that they're surrounding themselves with other females that are supportive, and empowering and showing the positivity of a female-female relationship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Versus, not, I guess, It's really hard to find those relationships, and it, to your point, you can count them all on one hand.
Yeah, and it is difficult. But the one thing that I think that it's important to make sure that, we nurture and we tell our daughters is independence is key. Mm-hmm. By that, what I mean is you have to be self-reliant. I remember, and I used to hate when they would say this. I remember when the girls would say, I'm going to find a rich doctor and marry him. And that used to burn me up because I said, no, you don't want to be dependent on any other individual. Listen, it is fine to have a partner in life who is going to be there with you to help you build, but you shouldn't rely on them to build.
Right.
That used to burn me up. And I think that
that was them trying to take the easy way out.
Well, yes. And I think that, if you fall down that path and you don't focus on acquiring your own skill set, building for your own future and all those things, when that person decides, or if that person decides that they want to step out or they want to do whatever, now they have you at a disadvantage because you can't provide for yourself.
Yeah. And even from that perspective, even the simple things, like there are so many things, that are, I guess, considered like male things, you know what I mean? Changing oil, changing a tire, being able to start a fire, just like little life skills like that, I feel like you all need to just know how to do, to fish, like as a female.
I think that we need to make sure they understand that there's no role for a man that a woman can't do.
Exactly.
There's no role for a man that a woman shouldn't be able to do, and vice versa. We're not raising sons at this point, but the goal is, it's okay. I appreciate you doing that for me, but I can do it on my own.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing, and so that's one of the things that I've always tried to have conversations with the girls about, and I have those conversations with Ayla now is, be self-reliant, rely on yourself, bet on yourself. That's the other thing too. I think that, and we were having a conversation earlier, me and you, and we were talking about you. I think it's important too that in order to support our daughters, we need to make sure that they have the ability to pursue their passions. And I say that is more importantly today than it was in previous generations, because with the access and the opportunities that they have, the chances for success for that are greatly increased. Now, listen, you still got to put work in, but when we start thinking about the inequality that exists sometimes in traditional places of employment. And when I say places of employment, I don't mean particular places. I mean, traditionally there has always been an inequality between men and women. You don't have to go a traditional route. In today's age, you have the opportunity to build your own stuff. And if you're passionate about something, we should be nurturing that, because that potentially could be something that you could now turn into a career or make a profit off.
No, definitely, because honestly, this is probably something I've struggled with for the past 25 years. Like, still not figuring out what I want to do when I grow up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've never known. I've never had, you know, like I had ideas when I was younger, but I never really pursued them, you know?
So do you...
Some were probably harder, you know, also to do, but you know, and I feel like I've always been stuck in this like limbo of working just to work, even though it's nothing that I'm fully passionate about.
So let me ask you this question. This is a leading question to a question I may potentially ask you, but I'm only going to ask you if you can stay on the light side of things. Would you say that as a young teenager or as a teenager, there were certain traits or qualities that were nurtured from your parents to you?
Well,
only on the light side.
yeah, no, I'm just trying to like think that one through. I feel like it was, honestly, it always felt like more kind of the situation like, okay, you're going to go to school so that you can get a good job, but then you're going to get married and have kids, you know? Yeah. So it was still within that traditional realm, but at least having an education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think that anything was ever like, what do you really, you know, what are you passionate about that you can, you know, focus on?
Yeah. And you know what? Again, time provides the opportunity to gain experience and knowledge that otherwise you wouldn't have had. And I know that the mindset was different back then. Mm-hmm. But now what happens is we have the opportunity to think different. I still think that, and you know this, and I tell the listeners, particularly Ayla, education is important. Yeah. But so are your passions. So you need to make sure you get your education. Right. But that doesn't mean that you have to lock yourself into something where you're going to be miserable. Because again, you know what me, I separate who I am from what I do. And I think that that's very important. Mm-hmm. But we want to make sure that in order to support our daughters, we start having these conversations and making sure they understand that you may decide to do something today that you don't want to do tomorrow. And that's okay. Yeah. But as long as you are continuing to move in a direction that you see fits who you are. Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I probably made just a lot of dumb decisions when I was younger that moved me away from that path, right? But I think, to your point, when you can create harmony between the two, like what you're doing for work plus your passion, you're just going to be that much happier. And so what I'll say to what you just said is this, but now that provides you the opportunity to learn or look at your experience and take what works from that and instill that in the girls, and what doesn't, you leave to the side. The thing about a challenge is an opportunity, right? As long as you learn from your failures or whatever, then you win. That's why, going back to Ayla, I think it's important for her to follow through on some of these things. Now, again, I don't want to be the parent that forces her to do anything, but I think she should at least try. And that's why I'm going to get out there with her and try to do some running with her and support her. And at the same time, I don't want to put her in a situation where she starts to feel self-confident and she doesn't have that self-esteem. And that's the balance that we actually need to focus to make sure that. Yeah. For her, I think once she does it, she's going to be fine. Yeah. You know what I mean? She's going to enjoy it. It's just getting her to do it. And you know, the other thing I wonder is whether or not someone else was going to do it and then they backed out. Oh, that could very well maybe, but we'll see. But, you know, and then kind of like what you're talking about, it's also like, so it is one of the things that I did learn, and that's where I try to like even help guide Lexi. If you remember, Lexi was like, oh, she wanted to go into business. She wanted to do this, and I
Is she 100% happy in her career now? I don't know. But
No,
I
she's
think
not.
I think it's just the environment that she's working
Yeah.
in, not so much her career choice.
But here's the difference, though.
But like to the point, like she wanted to go into business. And I said, well, why don't you go help your uncle take this job? You know, because this is essentially what you're going to be doing if you get into business, like sitting at a desk and banging out work for the most part, right? And that was so
I think
in that daughter, she did not want to be in business.
Well, I think there's a difference. I mean, there is a difference depending on what it is, because if we define what he technically, he is a CPA.
Right.
And depending on what business you get into, it could be very different from that. But I hear what you're
Right.
saying. It's go and experience something and see what you want to do. Now, the
Right.
part about her not being extremely happy with what she does, I know that for a fact because I asked her. But at the same time, she is happy. She might, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
This is where I talk about separating what you do from who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to enjoy 100% what it is that you do. It's nice if you do,
Yeah.
but you don't have to. I think that, when it comes down to it, what we want to make sure that we're instilling in these and in our daughters and kids in general is, life is about balance. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be all roses and whatever you want to call it 100% of the time. But you got to look at that balance. And as long as you can maintain that balance and you're happy, then, it's a win.
Yeah, for sure.
So, today we're talking about, raising teenage girls and how it can be a challenge. It takes patience, empathy, and understanding to do so. The key to success is found through communicating openly and honestly, and setting clear boundaries that take into account who they are. But at the same time, you have to have a clear set of consequences and be able to support and empower them with their choices and their passions. So let's empower our daughters to embrace their uniqueness, chase their dreams, and rewrite the story of what it means to be a teenage girl in today's world. Because when we believe in their potential, there's no limit to what they can achieve. Thank you for joining us on the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Please be sure to follow us and leave feedback on your favorite podcasting app. Until next time, stay well.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.